All right, Rabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. The beautiful daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Shanti and Avram Kelman for dedicating all the Shurim and Drushos this month in honor of Yechiel's engagement, to Alana Falik and in memory of their parents, Jerome and Bernice Kelman, and Alexander and Frederica David Zichronim Livracha. To thank Barak, Maya, Sandy Hoffman, Dora Limas, and Avi Malamed for dedicating the Shurim and Drushos this month in memory of Ruvain ben Emmanuel Zichronim Livracha. To thank Ayala and Sarah Steinberg for dedicating the Shurim and Drushos this month in the Zchus of for Shulamis Bas Susha and the merit of her continued health. The Daf Yomi shir for dedicating the Shurim this month, the Zchus Shalema for Yehuda ben Michal. We thank Howard Friedman for dedicating our day of learning in commemoration of the yahrzeit of his father, Shalom ben Hillel Tzvi, Zichron Libracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. With that, let us begin. A lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, but really some exceptionally magnificent and incredible Gemara ahead. So we are picking up. Today's daf is Samech Beis 62, and we are picking up Emirat Hashem on Samech Aleph Amud Beis 61b at the first wide lines. Like I said, a lot to do today, but Emirat Hashem we will get the job done. Rabbi Eliezer Omar Filach Nisa Lo Mea Shvachos. So also remember again the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer said even if a woman brought one first wide line 61b, even if a woman brought 100 maidservants into the marriage, nevertheless, Rabbi Eliezer says she has to do something, because if she is just idle, so idleness ultimately leads to immorality, to promiscuity. So it says, Amr Malkio, Amr Adabar Ava, Halach Rabbi Eliezer. So Rav Malkio said in the name of Rav Adabar Ava that the halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer. Amr Rabbi Chanina Breid Rav Ika, Shipud Shvachos V'gumos Rav Malkio, Beloris Efer Makle Ugvina Rav Malkio. So we'll say, interestingly enough, we have two different opinions in the Gemara, one by the name of Rav Malkio, and one by the name of Rav Malkiya. So the Gemara says the halachos concerning shipud, we're not going to get into these halachos right now, but the halachos of shipud, shvachos, and gumos, those all go according to Rav Malkio, and the halachos of beluris, which is like the type of haircut that idolaters used to have, Efer Makla and Gavina, all follow of Malkiya. So the Gemara says, how do you remember that? The Papa Amar Masnisin Umasnisa Rav Malkiya, Shmaisisa Rav Malkiyo. The very easy way to remember this is as follows: Masnisin Mishnayis and Masnisa Braisos go according to Rav Malkiya, and then ultimately again Shmaisisa, which means again out statements by Amoraim, those go according to Rav Malkiyo. And the way to remember that is V'simanich Masnisa Malkisa. The way to remember it is the Masnisa Mishnayis go according to the Malkisa. Literally, again, the queen, which is again the queen being a reference over here. Ultimately, again to Rav Malkiyo. So my benay, I will say, what's the nafkamina between these approaches? Ike benay shvachas. So I will say, so again, the only point of contention might be ultimately again who is the author of this particular statement regarding maidservants. Okay, Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer. So what Reb Shimon Gamliel says. Now remember, Reb Shimon Gamliel says at the end of the Mishnah, he seems to quote the same exact idea. He says that even if she brings in a whole bunch of maidservants, ultimately again she still has to do something. But his lashon is because idleness brings to shiamum. Shiamum means like insanity. So says the Gemara, Hainu Tanakama. I don't understand. So Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is saying the same thing as Rabbi Eliezer. In other words, they're both saying that even if a woman has enough of a staff to free her from all domestic responsibility, she still has to do something. Again, I will say, I want to point out, this is not a din in a woman. This is a din in people. People can't be idle. The best thing in life is to be busy. The busier you are, the better off you are in life. Too much free time, hobbies, this, that. Hobbies are nice. At the end of the day, work and work hard. Find something meaningful to sink your teeth into. Because if a person is idle, a person is not occupied at all times, most of us don't do well with large chunks of unstructured time. So the Gemara says over here, so at the end of the day, they seem to be saying the same thing, to which the Gemara says, Hainu Tanakama. So again, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is saying the same thing as Rabbi Eliezer. It's actually very interesting. Ika benaihu dimitalala biguraisa katnaisa vinid rashir. I will say the nafkamina could be the following situation of a woman who has a puppy, right? Puppies, right? That's the lashon over here of guraisa kitnaisa. Ultimately, again, she's busy with puppies, right? Or nidar shir are games. Our games. Look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, "The metaltal beguraisi kitnaisa v'ndasher misachekes beklavim dakim." She plays with little dogs. Uschok shekorin shtaker lidei zima ika lidei shemum leka. So I'll say, here's what's interesting. You see, insanity, the concern about insanity, only comes about if mamish are occupied with nothing. With nothing. So in this case, if she has puppies or she has a board game, is she occupied with nothing? No, she's occupied. The problem is promiscuity is a concern when you're not occupied constructively. I will say such an incredible yesod. So is playing with puppies and board games considered to be constructive engagement? No. We'll say, by the way, interesting. See, playing with puppies is not considered to be constructive engagement. It's just another raya in my long list of Talmudic rayas. So I'll say, in any event, the point here was it's actually quite fascinating. In other words, so what the Gemara is suggesting is like this. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is nervous about like what he calls insanity. Okay, going out of your mind. Rabbi Eliezer is concerned about immorality. So the fear of insanity is staved off as long as a person is engaged. In other words, the insanity piece, and insanity probably is a little bit too strong of a word, but the insanity piece is a concern if like you're just doing nothing. If you're just staring into space, that's when we're concerned you're going to lose your mind. Okay, so doing anything addresses that fear. Immorality is really incredible. The concern of getting lured into immorality is not a concern of a person being unengaged. The concern of immorality is, if I'm not doing something constructive with my life, there's nothing to pull me away from the other things that lure me towards them. I would say such an incredible yesod. In other words, that like the pull towards promiscuity is something that human beings, all of us, people in different ways, but everyone contends with at some way, at some stage in life. The only way to save myself from that is to know that I'm engaged in something constructive, something meaningful. Because if I'm doing something meaningful with my life, then at the end of the day, why do I want to derail a life of meaning by engaging in something promiscuous, by engaging in something immoral? Masha'in Kain, if I'm not engaged constructively, even if I'm engaged, but it's not constructive, there's nothing to pull me away from those other forces that seek to derail me. It's such an incredible yesod that the only way to really combat immorality, promiscuity, and that push and pull that many of us experience in different ways is to make sure that not just I'm engaged, but I'm engaged constructively in a life of meaning. Incredible. Bose Mishnah. Hamadires ishto mitash mishamita. An interesting case. A man makes a neder. So Bose, literally the way it translates is, a man makes a neder prohibiting his wife to tashmish shamita, to intimacy. Now, both say Rashi points out over here, it can't be that he's making a neder saying, I hereby prohibit tashmish shamita on you. I will say why? Because remember again, ona, so physical intimacy is one of the things that a husband is obligated to go ahead and provide his wife with. And the mice, again, according to many opinions, we saw that's a daraisa. So making a t'nai that a husband is not going to be intimate with his wife is masna amasha kasov batorah. It is making a t'nai that runs a condition that runs contrary to biblical law, and such a t'nai such a t'nai is batal. So therefore, Rashi points out it must be that the neder over here is he's saying, I hereby prohibit upon myself the pleasure of intimacy. So in other words, I'm not prohibiting anything on you, I'm prohibiting it on myself. So that such a neder ultimately, again, can go ahead and actually work. So Beishamim, I'm supposed to say, here's the shaila. How long could such a neder be in effect, and ultimately, again, a marriage still be sustainable? So Beishamim shtei shabasos. If he makes a neder up to 2 weeks, in other words, a husband can make a neder for up to 2 weeks that he's not going to be intimate with his wife. Okay, more than 2 weeks, ultimately he'd have to divorce her and pay her out her ksuva because it's not fair to her. That's not a marriage. Beis Hillel omrim Shabbos achos. Beis Hillel says 1 week. Now we'll say obviously no one is encouraging this type of neder. It's wrong. It's not okay. Any time that intimacy is used as a tool, right? As a tool to kind of as leverage again from one spouse to the other is never a correct thing in a Jewish man, a healthy marriage. But Lamaisa, they're asking technically, how long could such a neder be in effect without Chazal telling us we need to dissolve this marriage? So Beis Shammai says up through 2 weeks. Beis Hillel says 1 week. Well, so if you look at Rashi says the first one line, Beis Shammai om shtei shabasos im hidira beis shabasos tamtin. If he made the neder for the duration of 2 weeks, fine, they can stay in the marriage. Ve'im yoser, but more than 2 weeks, yotzi v'yitain ksuva. So if the husband made the neder for more than 2 weeks, then ultimately he needs to divorce her and pay her out her ksuva. Beis Hillel, 1 week. So the Gemara says, here we go. Hatamidim yotzim. So we'll say, so now that we've spoken about this idea of a neder precluding intimacy, the Mishnah seeks out other circumstances which could also preclude intimacy. For example, Hatamidim yotzim leTalmud Torah shelo b'rishus shloshim yom. Talmidei Chachamim can leave their homes without their wife's permission to go and learn Torah in a different city for up to 30 days. So again, I will say this is in a very specific situation. So Talmid Chacham could go, leave home without permission for up to 30 days. Hapoalim, so we'll say, so now interestingly enough, now the Gemara says, Hapoalim, Shabbos, Shloshim. So we'll say, so just understand what's driving this. What's driving this now is a discussion regarding the chiyuv of ona. Ona, as we said before, is a husband's obligation to be intimate with his wife. As we're going to see, so now the shaila is, how often is a husband obligated to be intimate with his wife? Well, we're going to see that halacha l'maisa, the core obligation, is fundamentally dependent on what a person does for a living. So the Gemara says, for example, Hapoalim, Shabbos achos. So this is just by the Poalim. Workers are permitted to go ahead and go away from home for 1 week at a time. So remember again, there's going to be 3 sets of halachas over here. Halacha number 1 is when a husband makes a neder, prohibiting himself from being intimate with his wife. How long can you have such a neder in effect before we force the dissolution of the marriage? Beis Shammai 2 weeks, Beis Hillel 1 week. Next halacha. Talmidei Chachamim could go away from home to learn Torah for up to 30 days, even without spousal permission. Workers, Poalim, could go away from home for up to 1 week without spousal permission. Okay, now part 3 of the Mishnah. Ha'ona ha'amura b'Torah. We'll say, what is the basic level of what we'll call conjugal frequency, right? How often is a husband obligated to be intimate with his wife? So the Gemara says, Hatayolin b'chol yom. Tayolin are obligated every day. Now we don't know what tayolin are. We'll see that in the Gemara. Poalim will say is kind of a very generic term that just means workers. Hapoalim shtayim b'Shabbos. Poalim are obligated twice a week. Hachamarim, donkey drivers, achos b'Shabbos, once a week. Hagamalim, camel drivers, achos l'shloshim yom, once every 30 days. I will say, as we're going to see, a lot of this, in other words, where do these numbers come from? A lot of it is based on, just like, for lack of a better term, like availability, right? In other words, so what you begin to see is whoever these tayalim are, they're always around, right? The poalim, a little bit less. The donkey drivers, the gamalim, a little bit less. That's why, again, once every 30 days. The camel drivers, the donkey drivers are once a week. The camel drivers, even less, once every 30 days. Saponim are sailors, achos l'shisha chadashim, once every 6 months. And I will say, again, remember, this is talking, these frequency is reflective that sailors were often away at sea for prolonged amounts of time. David Rabbi Eliezer. I will say this is all the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. So really, really fascinating Mishnah. Where here the Mishnah is outlining the obligation of Ona and is saying to us that the obligation of Ona is very much linked and dependent on what the husband is doing for a living. Incredible. But also, let's see the Gemara. So my time in the Beis Shammai. So also, remember again, let's start with the first part of the Mishnah. We're going to go methodically through the Mishnah. What was the first part of the Mishnah? First part of the Mishnah, husband makes a neder, prohibiting himself from being intimate with his wife. I will say, so again, remember, the problem with such a neder is it fundamentally erodes one of the important pillars of marriage. So the shaila is, how long could we have such a neder in existence before we force the dissolution of the marriage? Again, let's go through the machlokes. Beis Shammai, 2 weeks. Beis Hillel, 1 week. What's the logic? Says the Gemara, my time of the Beis Shammai. What's Beis Shammai's logic? So Gamri miyoledes nekeva. So Beis Shammai learns this out from the case of yoledes nekeva. Rabbi say this is actually very interesting. When a woman gives birth to a girl, midda oraisa, she is timeya. She's not permitted to be with her husband for 2 weeks after the birth. And I will say, and I remember again, we contemporarily have a totally different system because without getting into all the intricacies right now, what we have done in contemporary halacha is blended the halachos of Nida and Zava Gidola. So like, for example, Midda Oraisa, a woman who's a Nida, so Nida lasts for how long, Midda Oraisa? 7 days. 7 days. And by the way, there's no clean days, bleeding days. It's 7 in totality. And after 7 days, a woman goes to the mikvah. That's it. We have this system of 5 days and then 7 clean days. It's a combination of Zava Gidol that got wrapped into this. So Midda Oraisa over here, woman gives birth to a girl. For 14 days after she gives birth to a girl, she's not permitted to be, she's Tmeah. She's not permitted to be with her husband. So Beis Shammai sees from that, like a paradigm, that it's normal, it's acceptable for a couple not to be intimate for 14 days. In other words, that's called a normative duration. Therefore, the husband's neder could extend for up to 14 days. Beis Hillel Gamri, Beis Hillel says, 1 second. There's the case of when a woman gives birth to a boy. What's the halacha when a woman gives birth to a boy? She's tamei for how long? 7 days. 7 days, right? Therefore, again, Beis Hillel will say that halacha l'maisa, 1 week, 7 days is the maximum duration. So I will say, so the Gemara says, one side, Beis Hillel, that doesn't make any sense. If you're going to learn it out from a woman who gives birth to a boy, you could just as easily learn it out from a woman who gives birth to a girl. In other words, both of those are biblically prescribed durations. So ultimately, the Torah itself says that a husband and wife are separate from each other, physically separate from each other, intimately separate from each other for 14 days, right? So why are you choosing a boy, not a girl? So the Christian goes, you're right. If Beis Hillel was in fact learning this out from Yoledes, you would be correct. Ela Beis Hillel minida gamri la. Oh, I will say Beis Hillel doesn't learn it out from Yoledes. Where does Beis Hillel learn it out from? Nida. I will say, that's what I just mentioned before. What is the biblical duration of Nida? 1 week, 7 days. So therefore, Beis Hillel says that 7 days is an acceptable duration in which husband and wife are separate from each other. So both say, what comes out is something really very interesting here. That halacha l'maisa, Beis Shammai is looking at, we're trying to figure out, just telling we're trying to, husband's making a neder, saying that I'm not going to be intimate with my wife. So we're trying to figure out what's the maximum duration of that neder that's acceptable. In other words, to be clear, the neder is never acceptable. What we're asking is, what's the maximum duration before we force the dissolution of the marriage? That's the machlokes. So Beis Shammai will say, look, we have a halacha that says husband and wife are physically, are intimately separate after the birth of a girl for 2 weeks. We have such a concept like that. So 2 weeks is the maximum. Beis Hillel says, no, don't learn it out from Yoled. Let's learn it out from Nida. Nida 7 days. So Gemara says, what are they arguing about? This is very interesting. Mar sabar midi de sheach midi de shiach. So Beis Hillel holds, you should learn out a common occurrence from a common occurrence. The Rebbe say this is incredible. Rashi says, what's the common occurrence? Common occurrence is that a husband gets angry and makes a neder like this, which is a sad statement, right? But Beis Hillel is saying this is a common thing. Husband gets angry, makes a neder, prohibiting himself from getting any benefits from his wife. So that's common. What else is common? Nida is common. So therefore, again, Beis Hillel says, learn out a common occurrence from a common occurrence. Umar sabar midi duhu garim la, midi duhu garim la. Beis Shammai says, learn out a situation that he causes from a situation that he causes. Meaning what? So he's causing the neder. Learn it out from childbirth, which obviously only occurs if the husband is involved. Right? So that's okay. So learn it out in different ways. Amarav machlokes b'mefarish aval b'stam divrei hakol yotzi la'al tevidi in Kesuva. Furthermore, Rav comes along and says the machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is only when the husband explicitly articulates the duration of the neder. I will say, let's say he makes a neder and doesn't give a duration. Right? So he goes there and he says, I hereby prohibit myself from being intimate with my wife, and he doesn't give a duration of the neder. So what's the halacha? Rav says he has to divorce her immediately and pay her out her full ksuva. So the Gemara says, Shmuel says, no. Afilu bistam nami yamtin shema yimatzei pesach lenidro. Shmuel says, no. He doesn't have to divorce immediately. We give him some time because let's see, maybe he'll find a Pesach. I will say Pesach means an opening that would allow for annulment of the neder. So the Gemara says, "How pligi b'chadazim?" No, we already had this machlokes once, Rav and Shmuel. This nan, here we go. Hamadris ishtomei lechanoslo. If a man makes a general neder prohibiting his wife to get benefit from him, I will say this is not in the realm of intimacy. This is stam. Man makes a neder prohibiting his wife from getting benefit from him. So yamtin shema yimatzei pesach. I'm sorry. Ad shloshim yom yamid parnes. So I will say up until 30 days. The net doesn't cause the dissolution of the marriage. He has to support her through a third party. In other words, she can't get benefit from him, but he could give a third party the resources, and the third party ultimately could support the wife. Yoser mikan, more than 30 days, yotzi v'yitein ksuva. He has to divorce her and ultimately again pay her out her ksuva. V'amarav lo shana ela b'mefarish. That's only true ultimately again if he explicitly articulates the duration of the neder. Aval b'stam. But if he doesn't explicitly articulate the duration of the neder, yotzi la'alter v'yitin ksuva. He has to divorce her immediately and pay her a ksuva. We'll say that's Rav. Shmuel says no. Afilu b'stam nami yamtin shema yimatzei pesach l'nidro. Even stam, he doesn't have to divorce her immediately. Why? Maybe he'll find the pesach, an opening to annul the neder. So we'll say the point over the Gemara says is, this machlokes Rav and Shmuel has already been recorded once before. Why does it have to be stated a second time? Very simple. Tzricha. If we would have just said that case, so we'll say, remember again, in the case where a husband goes ahead and makes a neder, not allowing himself to be intimate with his wife, obviously, that intimacy cannot be provided by a third party, right? That would be there's no third party provider for intimacy, right? That would be a little bit of an issue. So we'll say, so again, because of that type of situation, therefore, halacha l'maisa, that's perhaps where Rav says that he has to divorce her immediately when there is no duration attached to the neder. But in the case of support, where ultimately, again, it can be provided through a third party, ultimately, maybe he agrees with Shmuel. And if it would have just said the second case, it's only in this case that Shmuel says his opinion. But in the other case, what I thought he's moded to Rav, therefore tzricha. Even though again the machlokes is the same between Rav and Shmuel, nevertheless it needed to be explicitly articulated in both cases. Incredible. We'll say, let us go weiter. So first of all, just the way the Rambam paskins in this case is that we pass night Beis Hillel, namely again, if a husband chas v'shalom makes a neder prohibiting any physical benefit or intimate benefit with his wife, ultimately again, if the neder is a duration of a week, we let it pass. But if it's more than a week, ultimately again, we would force the husband to go ahead and divorce her and give her ksuva. Incredible. Says the Gemara. Let's go back there. Talmidim yotzin l'talmud. So also the next part of the Mishnah was Talmidei Chachamim could go ahead and leave home for up to 30 days without spousal permission to go and learn Torah in another city. Birshus Kama. So we'll say, what happens if a husband gets permission? It says husband gets permission, right? He asks his wife, I want to go learn Torah in a faraway city. How long can he leave for? So the Gemara says, Kama debai. What do you mean? If he gets permission, so he could go as long as he wants, as long as he has permission for. Top of Samach Beis Rabbi say. This is actually incredible. Orcha de milsa kama. What the Gemara is asking is, what's appropriate? What's appropriate? I'll say, by the way, this is also something interesting, that sometimes in marriage you get permission for something, right? But just because you get permission doesn't mean it's a good idea. So therefore, I'll say, it's such an incredible, some things don't change in the world. I'll say, so interesting enough, the Gemara is saying, so if you get permission, you go along for even a longer amount of time. Okay, but what's the maximum amount of time that it's appropriate to be away? To which the Gemara says, Amarav, chodesh kan v'chodesh babayis. Rav says, at most, you could go away for a month and be home for a month. Right? So you could be away for a month, home for a month. Shneimar, where does he get this from? The chol dvar hamachlokes haba v'ayotzeis chodesh b'chodesh l'kol chodshei hashana. Rabbi Yochanan says, chodesh kan ushnayim bebeso. Rabbi Yochanan says you can go away for a month as long as you're home 2 months afterwards. Shneimar, chodesh yu ba'levanon shnayim chadoshim bebeso. So I will say, interestingly enough, these psukim that are being quoted over here are the workers by the Beis Hamikdash. When Shlomo Melech commissioned the workers for the Beis Hamikdash, he needed a massive workforce. So it's interesting. So the first part of the pasuk seems to indicate that what? First part of the pasuk seems to indicate that the workers We're away for 1 month working, we're home for a month. Second part of the pasuk seems to indicate that they were working for away from home for 1 month, home for 2 months. The Rav Nami my time alone Amra Meahi. So why doesn't Rav learn out from Yochanan's pasuk? To which the Gemara says, Shiny binyan beis hamikdash. I'm sorry, I said that was incorrect. The first pasuk ultimately again. That is correct. Fine. The first Rav is quoting his pasuk from Divrei Yamim, and Rabbi Yochanan is quoting his pasuk from Malachim Aleph. So why doesn't Rav go ahead and learn it from Rabbi Yochanan? Shiny binyan beis hamikdash te'efshar al yedei achirim. They both say this is incredible. Rabbi Yochanan's pasuk, I should say it a little bit differently. The first pasuk is talking about those who served in the general service of the king. That's Rav's pasuk. Rabbi Yochanan's pasuk, where it's 1 month home, 2 months away. I'm sorry. 1 month away, 2 months home, just the opposite, is talking about the building of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Gemara says, why doesn't Rav learn out from Rabbi Yochanan's pasuk? Shiny binyan Beis HaMikdash. Beis HaMikdash is different. Why? The efshar al yedei achirim. Because Rav will say, again, Rav will say like this, when it came to the building of the Beis HaMikdash, you could be away from home for 1 month, right? And home for 2 months. Why? Because the Beis HaMikdash has to get built. It needs a workforce. Does it need you? No. Therefore, if you're going to be away from home for a month, appropriate to be away from home for 2 months afterwards. But Rabbi said, listen to this. Contrast that with the learning of Torah. Rabbi said, only you can learn your Torah. No one else could learn your Torah on your behalf. In other words, the Beis HaMikdash has to get built. Whether you build it, whether I build it, doesn't really make a difference. The ikar is that it just has to get built. When it comes to Talmud Torah, however, again, halacha l'maisa, you have to learn your Torah, I have to learn my Torah. I can't fulfill your obligation, you can't fulfill my obligation. That's why Rav holds that halacha l'maisa, when it comes to Talmud Torah, 1 month at home, or I should say 1 month away, 1 month at home. When it comes to binyan beis hamikdash, it's 1 month away, 2 months at home. Because Lamaisi, if you spend an extra month at home, that's fine. The workforce rotates. Such an incredible yisod. Rabbi Yochanan, so we'll say, the deeper message is, when it comes to matters of your own ruchnius, you cannot outsource that. Only you could take care of your ruchnius. No one else can say, and this is so incredibly important because, we live in an age where everyone wants to be inspired. The mistake we often make when it comes to inspiration is we assume that it is someone else's responsibility to inspire us. Right? We outsource inspiration. We outsource spiritual success. No one has responsibility for your inspiration except for you. Are there people who could help maybe, kindle a little spark? Of course, we all need someone to kindle a spark. But Lamaisa, inspiration is not something you glean from someone else. Inspiration is something that you create inside of you. Your Torah, your ruchnius, your spirituality is something that could only be handled and ultimately mastered by you and you alone. Such an incredible yisur. Rabbi Yochanan, my time mehi. Why doesn't Rabbi Yochanan learn out from the same source as Rav? So he says, Shiny Hasam, the Islay Harbacha was different, Rabbi say, because Rav's pasuk was talking about those who worked for the king. So Rabbi say, when you worked for the king, you made a lot of money. So therefore I will say, because you had the opportunity to make a lot of money, so ultimately, again, it was okay to be away for 2 months. It was okay to be away for 2 months. So we'll say we learn a very important. So we'll see more about that in just a moment. So therefore, that's not good. That doesn't create a paradigm. So in other words, Rabbi Yochanan will say the paradigm ultimately is if you're going to be away for 1 month, then ultimately again, be home for 2 months afterwards. What about the workers of the king who are 1 month home, 1 month away? They're making a lot of money. So because they're making a lot of money, therefore again, their wives were a little bit more accepting that Allah Chamaisa, they were away for more prolonged or more regular amounts of time. Amarav, so we'll say incredible Gemara. Anocha shoveres chatzi goshal. And I will say, so I just want to point out over here, we're going to have a lot of different topics, some beautiful agarita. The linkage are the people who are being quoted. We just quoted Rav before. We're quoting Rav again now. So Rav says, Anocha shoveres chatzi gufo shel adam. Now we'll say, Anocha is literally sighing, right? A krach, right? And Anocha, sigh, literally has the ability to break half a person's body, right? So we'll see what this means. Shene'emar ve'ata ben adam ha'anach b'shivron masnayim u'b'merirus te'enach. So we'll say, the Gemara is quoting the pasuk from Yecheskel, and you, Ben Adam, this is Hashem speaking to Yecheskel, you, Ben Adam, ha'anach b'shivra masnaim, which literally means when you sigh, it'll break you to the loins. The loins are midpoint of the body, So you see from here that sighing breaks half a person's body. Rabbi Yochanan says, af kol gufo shel adam. No, sighing has the ability to break a person's entire body. Shene amar, vayoki yomru elecha al ma'ata ne'anach, va'amarta al shmua ki ba'a v'namas kolei v'rafu kol yadayim v'kiyasa kol ruach v'chol berchaim telach namum. Mayim, excuse me. Suppose I said here, the pasuk over here that they're quoting, also from Yechezkel, seems to indicate that a sigh, ne'anach, has the ability to remove all of the strength of a person. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan, nami haksib b'shivra masnayim. But Rabbi Yochanan, what do you do with Rav's pasuk that says that ultimately sighing only breaks half of the body? Hahidichi maschala mi masnayim maschala. It means that when a person sighs, they begin to lose koach from the midpoint of their body, and it spreads out from there. So the Gemara says, V'rav nami haksib b'namas kolei v'rafo kol yadayim v'kasa kol ruach. Rav, what do you do with the pasuk of Rabbi Yochanan that says that sighing breaks the entire body? Shiny shmur the beis hamikdash tetekifa tuva. It's different. That sighing that Rabbi Yochanan's pasuk is referring to is a sighing, a sadness over the destruction of the beis hamikdash. And a sighing over the destruction of the beis hamikdash, Rabbosai, has the ability to literally deprive a person of all their koach. Rabbosai, what does it mean when the Gemara says here? So we have a machlokes, right? Does sighing sap you of half of your vitality or all of your vitality? They will say, what's a sigh? What's a sigh? What does that mean? Rabbi Nachman says something so beautiful. He says, Anocha, a sigh, is a sign of yeyosh, is a sign of despair. When a person gives up hope. So Rabbi says, it's a fundamental machlokes. When you give up hope, how much of your life vitality does that deprive you of? So Rav says, not all of your vitality, but half of your vitality. Rabbi Yochanan says, when you're miya'ish, when you sigh, sighing is the ultimate sign of yesh, the ultimate sign of giving up hope, you lose all of your vitality. We'll say such an incredible yisod that what Rabbi and Rabbi Yochanan are agreeing on is when you give up hope on yourself, then ultimately understand you're pulling the rug out from under you. See, we often think that it's other people who sap of our vitality. It's other people who undermine us, other people who pull the rug out from us. And it's not true. Other people may try, but the only person who can be absolutely successful in undermining your future dynamic activity is you and you alone. That's the anocha. That sigh represents a giving up on oneself, a giving up on life. And when you give up on life, when you sigh on yourself, Rabbi Yochanan, okay, they argue on differing degrees on how down and out you may be, but Lamai said that krechs, that sigh of Yeosh is the most dangerous thing that a person could encounter in life. Such an incredible. So I will say, Rabbi Nachman speaks extensively about this concept that people think the worst thing you could do in life is an Aveira. He says that's true, but the worst Aveira a person could commit is Yeosh. Is when a person gives up on themselves. The moment you give up on yourself, that's the worst Aveira. Because when you give up on yourself, anything and everything becomes possible afterwards. That's the anacha, that's the side that the Gemara is referring to over here. So I'll say the Gemara tells an incredible story. Listen to this. Hahu Yisrael v'Ovikon. We'll say Samech Beizim with Aleph, right across from Tosos Tayolin. Hahu Yisrael v'Ovikon Davu Ka'azli ba'archa. There was once a Jew and an idolater who were traveling together on the road. So the Ovi Kochavim was unable to catch up. He was unable to keep up, I should say, with the Jew. The Jew was walking really fast, and ultimately the Akum could not go ahead and keep up with him. So I will say, what did the Akum do? This is a smart Akum. Ad Karei Chorban Beis HaMikdash. Ultimately, again, the Akum began to speak about the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So we'll say, hoping that what's going to happen, the Jew is going to sigh, right? And sighing again saps you of some of your vitality, and the Akum would be able to go ahead and catch up with him. So Nagid, right? V'isnach. So what happened? The Jew heard it. He remembered, and ultimately he sighed. But still, the Jew didn't slow down his pace. And ultimately, again, the Ovid Kochavim could not keep up. Amrlei. So the Ovid says, I don't understand. I learned Kesuvos Daf Samech Beis Amud Aleph. Lav Amrisa. Anocha Shoveres Chatzi Gufo Shel Adam. So the Akum says to the Jew, I don't understand. The Gemara says that sighing saps a person of half of their vitality. Amarle, the Jew says, it says incredible. Amarle, hanimili milsacharati. That's true when you sigh over something new. When you sigh over something new, in other words, I will say, here the anocha is used as a sigh of sadness. When does sadness sap one of their vitality? When I'm sad over some type of new event. Avalha, deshanan balo. But the Churban Beis HaMikdash, unfortunately, as sad as it is old news. And because it's old news, ultimately, again, it doesn't sap a person of their vitality. To which the Gemara says, by the way, it's such an incredible idea. So there's two pieces over here. We were talking about anocha sighing, ultimately, again, as a form of yeush, as a form of despair. Here the Gemara is talking about sighing as a form of sadness. And you see over here also the incredible way that sadness depletes a person also. Right? Sadness depletes you of your koach. But the Gemara says it's only new sadness. Old sadness ultimately doesn't deplete the person. The Gemara says, the amri inish, the malfi tichli lo bahasa. It's a very interesting expression. Look at Rashi, right across in Rashi. The milfa tichli lo bahasa. Isha halimudes l'shakel baneh l'kovram. Eina timio mifachedes b'mos echavem shekvar limudos. This is actually a heartbreaking statement. A woman who is used to burying her children does not become overwhelmed at the death of another one of her children. So I will say, what the expression is essentially something very profound. You know, when a person has encountered grief, they are prepared to deal with future grief. Right? Often you see this, that people, sometimes when people encounter grief for the first time, they're overwhelmed and they could lose themselves in that grief. A person who's experienced grief in life has the tools to deal with that grief, hopefully, and therefore does not become overwhelmed or really swallowed up by that grief. So therefore the Gemara says over here, so the Jew is saying back to the Akum, at the end of the day, of course, is it sad that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed? Of course. But that's old grief. And we've already, again, developed the tools to be able to properly deal with that. But there's so much to say on these Gemaras, but we'll go weiter. So the Gemara goes weiter. Tayalim b'chol yom. Hatayalim b'chol yom. So we'll say, so remember again, Tayalin have an obligation of physical intimacy with their wives every day. So my Tayalin, who are Tayalin? Amar Rava, B'nei Pirki. So that's very interesting. Rava says, B'nei Pirkim, Rashi says, B'nei Pirkim, Tamidim Sharav Matzoy Lahem B'iran, V'shonim Prakim U'V'lonim B'Beisam. These are Tamidi Chachamim who learn locally. They learn locally. So because they're not traveling, because they're not traveling, and therefore they're living at home, therefore they have an obligation of physical intimacy every day. So the Gemara says, interestingly enough, Amar li Abaye man dichsiv b'hu shav lachem mashkimekom me'acharei sheves ochel lechem atzavim kain litain yedido shena. So we'll say the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Tehillim, actually a very beautiful pasuk. Literally again, shav lachem mashkimekom, right? So literally again, emptiness or woe to you, those who get up. Me'acharei sheves ochle lechem atzavim, those who go and eat the bread of sadness. Kain yitain liyedido shena, he will give sleep to his beloved. Who is this pasuk referring to? We'll say actually very profound. Amar Yitzchak. Elu nishosein shel tamidei chachamim shemenadados sheina me'ineihem ba'olam hazeh ubaos lechaye olam haba. So we'll say this refers to the wives of Talmidei Chachamim, because the wives of Talmidei Chacham ultimately often have sleepless nights. Why do they have sleepless nights? Because again, their husbands often are are learning late or occupied with the needs of the community until late. So often again, they do not have the companionship of their husbands in the evening. And as a result of that, they often have sleepless nights. But whatever they lose out in Olam Hazeh, they make up in Olam Haba. Now, boss said, here's what's interesting. So the Gemara seems to indicate that Talmidei Chachamim are not home every single night, right? In other words, they're learning late until the evening or occupied with other matters late until the evening. So obviously, Tayalim can't be Talmidei Chachamim. Va'at Amrit B'nei Pirki, Al Amar Abaye Kiderav. Da Amar Rav Kigon Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas. What's an example of Tayalim? What's very interesting. A good example of Tayalim is like Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas. Now, I'll say, what was unique of Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas? Rashi says over here, Melame Tinokos Haya Umisparnes Mehen. We'll say Shmuel Bar Shilas was a Melame Tinokos. He was a Rebbe. He was a Rebbe in the Cheder, right? A Rebbe of children. Now we'll say, this is actually a profound Gemara. Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas, Da'achal Mididei, he ate of his own food. V'shasi mididei, drank of his own drink. V'gani bitula dapadne, and lived in his own home. V'lo chalif parasitka demalka bave, and the king's tax collector never went ahead and passed by his gate. So we'll say, now, what is this talking about? Rosh Shlomo bar Shilas was just a guy who made not a guy. He was important. He just made a simple living. He made a living, right? He supported himself and his family, wasn't wealthy, wasn't financially successful. The king's tax collector never stopped by his house. Why? Because he wasn't on the radar. Just wasn't on the radar. He was just a regular guy. So I both say, a guy like this, it's so profound, right? A guy like this, he just lived a nice, quiet life. I will say, by the way, sounds great. It's like one of those days when you see the guy cutting the grass, and you're like, wow, I want to be that guy. I just want to sit on the tractor a whole day, right, with my earphones on and just whatever. Go home, come, do my job, go home at night, drink a beer or 7, right? And that's it, right? And that's it. Like that's like, so I'll say, like, lahavdil, that's Rav Shlomo bar Shilas. Again, lahavdil, in Dvarim Shebek Dusha, he was a Rebbe. He went to work, he taught his Talmidim, he made enough money to support his family. That's it, he came home. That's an example of Tayolin. Someone ultimately, again, who halacha l'maisa, just kind of, he's around. Incredible. So Kiyas Rabin Amar Kigon Mefanki de Ma'arava. So Rabin said, it could also be a reference to Mefanki de Ma'arava, also means the fastidious ones of Eretz Yisrael. A mifunak is someone who is very pampered. Someone's very pampered. Someone who's very, 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 what's the word? Like, not meticulous, but very, fastidious, right? But someone who's very, very pampered. So such an individual like that, the Mefanki de Ma'arava, those are the Tayalin. So they're always home, they're home, they're comfortable. Such a person like that has a Chiyav Ona every single day. Rabbi Avo Havakai Beibani. Let's listen to this. Rabbi Avo was in the bathhouse. Havi Samchile Tre Avdi, and there were 2 servants who were supporting him. Ifchas Beibani, the floor of the bathhouse opened up under him. Somebody to say, Israel Amud, they're supposed to listen to this. There was, he found himself on a pillar. So we'll say, so again, just to understand this is Rabbi Avo. We'll say, just the way bathhouses were constructed is that often, again, they were built, there was a heat, there was, what do they call it? Underfloor heating, floorboard heating, radiant heating? Whatever. So the idea is, so for the bathhouse, they would have a fire underneath the floor. Here, the bathhouse, the floor gave way. That was the interest of Rabbi Avo, found himself balanced on a pillar. And what did he do? So we'll say ultimately he pulled himself up and he pulled the 2 servants up as well. Okay. Rabbi Yochanan was walking up the steps. He was being supported by Rabbi Asi. If Chisa Darga to say, the stair gave out from under him, Salik Vaskinhu. So we'll say, so everybody fell. So ultimately, in this case, Rabbi Yochanan held the other 2 Rabbanim and pulled them up. So we'll say, in both of these stories, the person being supported by the other 2, right, exhibited a dramatic amount of strength and pulled the other 2 up. So let's listen to this. So we'll say at the end of the day, so they said to both of these Rabbanim, if you're so strong, obviously you have such physical vitality, you're so strong, why do you need these people to support you? It's a great answer. Amarlu imkain ma'aniach le'es zikna. If I don't conserve my strength now, what will I have in my old age? Right? If I don't conserve my vitality for now, what will I have in my old age? I will say what I will point out is what may be true for physical vitality is unequivocally false for spiritual vitality. There is no such thing as conservation of energy by spirituality. Right? When it comes to Ruchnius, I will say it's full in, all on, all the time. In other words, I will say you don't have to conserve. Because when it comes to Ruchnius, when it comes to physical vitality, it might be that there's a limited pool. That's definitely possible. When it comes to spiritual energy, there is an inexhaustible supply. So use and do more and never worry about depleting your spiritual resources. Workers have an obligation of Ona twice a week. So but we learn elsewhere that Polim are only obligated once a week. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina lo kashe kan ba'osim melachtem be'iran, kan ba'osim melachtem belocha be'ir acheres. Okay, here's the fundamental distinction. It depends where the Polim work. If they work ultimately again in their own city where they live, twice a week. They work in a different city once a week. Once a week. Taina Hachir Brisa that supports this. Hapolim Shtayim b'Shabbos. Polim are obligated to engage in physical intimacy twice a week. When is this so? Ba'osim melacha be'iran if they work locally. Aval ba'osim melacha be'ir acheres achas b'Shabbos. But if halacha l'maisa they go ahead and they work in a different city, they're only obligated once a week. Hachamorin achas b'Shabbos. Donkey drivers are obligated once a week. Amrali Rabba bar Rav Chanala Abaye. So I'll say, here's what's interesting. So remember again, if you go back to the beginning of the Mishnah, Machlokes Beishamai and Beisilel, about the duration of a neder prohibiting intimacy. So I'll say, interestingly enough, the Gemara says, I don't understand. Is that entire Machlokes only here to teach us halachas regarding Tayolin and Polim? Because remember again, once you get past the Tayolin and Polim, everyone has a less frequent obligation of ona. So whether they make a neder for 1 week or 2 weeks, it's not going to impact them at all. So is that entire part of the Mishnah, first part of the Mishnah, just there to teach us about the Tayla and the Poel? Amar leilo, Amar Bezer will say, Amar leilo, akulhu. Akulhu, ultimately, again, it's coming to teach us about everyone. What does this mean? I will say now, this is incredible. The machlokes, so the machlokes, the team Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, applies to all the different cases. We'll say, meaning what? It applies to all, meaning what? The Hashisha Chadashim Kamar. So we'll say, let's play this out for just a moment. Let's bring the two parts of the Mishnah together. So we'll say, let's take the case of a sailor, right? What's the ona of a sailor? What's the ona? Once every 6 months. Then we'll say, what's the halacha if a sailor makes a neder? And he says, I hereby prohibit myself from being intimate with my wife for 3 weeks. Shabbos, in that case, everyone would agree that what? Yotzei v'yitein ksuva. He has to divorce his wife. Such a marriage is not sustainable. And he has to pay her ksuva. But one second. His ona to begin with was only once every 6 months. That's the nature of his profession. So why would a 3-week neder cause the obligation to dissolve the marriage and pay out the ksuva? This is incredible. Why? This is such a profound Gemara. You cannot compare someone who has bread in their basket to someone who does not have bread in their basket. In other words, we'll say, this expression, of course, is by Rashi's le'inyan tainus. On a fast day, right? They both say, so again, if a person is fasting, and they know that whenever they want, the food is on the table. Whenever you have to, the food is on the table. So we'll say, everyone knows, so that gives a person the koach to continue to fast. Whereas if a person is fasting and there's no food available at all, so suddenly again it becomes much. In other words, the knowledge that something is available to me, even if I'm not going to avail myself of it, is much easier to bear than knowing that the item is not available to me at all. So also it's incredibly profound. So a sailor's wife, she knows that her husband is gone for protracted periods of time. But let's say for some reason, unexpectedly, he comes home. So she knows that if for some reason he's granted, shore leave and he's able to come home, that they could be together. Masha'inkin, if there's a neder, right? If there's a neder precluding that from occurring, so suddenly again it becomes a much more intense and difficult situation. So even for the sailor, whose ona ultimately again is limited to once every 6 months, halacha l'maisa, a neder would still be problematic by him as well, which is really quite a profound idea. So the Gemara says, it was a very interesting case. What happens if a person is a donkey driver, and then he becomes a camel driver? I was about to say, this is an interesting shaila. Can you switch professions? Because remember again, the ona for a donkey driver is how often? Once a week, right? For a camel driver, once every 30 days. So is a husband allowed to switch professions, or does he require the consent of his wife? Amrle, it was his incredible Gemara. Isha bekav v'tiflus me'asara kabinu prishus. I will say, so this is the expression. The expression is a woman would rather have less materialism and more of her husband than more money and less of her husband. So I will say, it happens to be like it's a dramatic Gemara. That I will say that ultimately men would often rather have more money and less relationship. Women would rather have more relationship and less money. It's an incredible, incredible Gemara. Shabbos says, so therefore what that tells you is that halacha l'maisa, if a husband is going to make a change in profession, and that change in profession is going to go ahead and require him to be away more often, halacha l'maisa, he needs the reshus of his wife in order to go ahead and make that career change, because it'll change the intimacy in their marriage as well. Incredible. We'll say also just like an incredible din in shalom bayis, that sometimes, so often, shalom bayis problems occur only because a spouse is not attentive enough. In other words, gifts or nothing replaces the presence of a spouse. Nothing, and sometimes again, what we don't realize, especially I will say in today's day and age, where we're always on our phone and we're always this, you could be physically somewhere, but yet you're totally not emotionally present. Totally not emotionally present. So a person could be spending time with their wife, but you're on your phone the whole time. But I'm here. You're not there. You're not there. If you're on your phone, you're not present. If you're on your computer, you're not present. You could be physically in the same room, but ultimately, again, if you're on something else, l'maisa, you're not present in the relationship. And halacha l'maisa, the Gemara says that what a wife often needs more than anything from her husband is presence. I need to know that you're there, and that is often more important than any type of monetary accomplishment he could gain. Incredible. So Gemara goes weiter. Has saponim achos l'shisha chadash neder v'elazer. So I will say saponim, sailors, once every 6 months. Amar Barona, Amarav, halacha Rabbi Eliezer. Halacha Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Rav Ava, Amar Rav Zudi Rabbi Eliezer. Avachachamim Omrim haTalmidim Yotzin Talmud Torah. Beis v'Gimel Shalim Shalom Birsha. So also Rabbi Eliezer was one who said in the Mishnah that Talmid Chacham could leave up to 30 days without spousal permission. The Chacham disagreed, and the Chacham said Talmid Chachamim could even leave for up to 2 to 3 years without spousal permission to learn Torah. Amar Rava, Samchu Rabbanan Adirav Adabar Abba va'avdei uvda benafshayu. So Rava says, listen to this. Talmidei Chachamim, they rely on Rav Adabar Abba. Rav Adabar Abba was the one who said that the Chachamim allow Talmid Chacham to leave for even up to 2 or 3 years. But just know that if you do that, avid uvda benafshayu, you're taking a risk with your own life. Taking a risk with your own life, leaving home for such protracted amounts of time. The Rabbi said, what does it mean you're taking your life into your own hands? Rabbi said, it's an incredible Gemara. Rav Rachumi, Rabbi said, used to learn in the yeshiva of Rava. In Mechuzah, so we'll say he stayed away. In other words, he learned away from home. He learned in Mechuzah the entire year. When would he come home? He would come Erev Yom Kippur. And Mepashus, he would steal him through Sukkos. Ben Azmanim. He would steal him through Sukkos. Okay. We'll say, watch this. Yom Echad Meshachte Shmaisa. One day, ultimately, Erev Yom Kippur, he got caught up in his learning, and he lost track of the time. Hava Mesachia Devisu. So I will say, watch, imagine the scene. His wife, expecting her husband home at Erev Yom Kippur, is waiting outside. She's waiting outside for him. Hashta asi. And she's saying to herself, he'll be home any minute. Lo asa. He didn't come home. Chalash daita. She became very sad. Achis dim asa me'ena. And she shed a tear. So the Gemara says, Hava Yosef be'igra. At that point, Rav Rachumi was sitting in the attic. If Pris Igra Mituse, the floor gave way from under him, V'nach Nafshe, and he died. I will say, why did he die? For the sin of causing his wife to cry. Now I will say, you say to yourself, it's totally counterintuitive, right? Lamaisa, she was sad that he didn't come home. So what's the punishment? That she was sad that he didn't come home. Now he's dead. So I will say, so remember again, what's unfolding over here is that Rav Rachumi was responsible for causing pain to his wife. Causing pain to any Jew is a terrible, terrible thing. Causing one's wife to cry, and Rabbi said, this is halacha l'maisa, this is Gemara, this is Torah that we live by. Causing one's wife to cry is an unforgivable transgression. Right? One's wife is the most important. A husband has an obligation to make his wife feel safe, to make his wife feel secure, to make his wife feel beloved, to make his wife feel like she is the center of his universe. And causing one's wife to shed a tear, the Gemara says, is one of the worst infractions a person could commit. To the point that Rav Rachumi, who was clearly a great Talmid Chacham, lost his life over having caused his wife shed a tear. So the Gemara goes weiter. Well, so you know what? That you have to stop it for today. Don't worry, we are right on schedule. We are fine in Yom Hashem. We'll catch up. Tomorrow's a shorter daf. We'll catch that. We'll say, by the way, we'll say tomorrow just coming attractions, and it's Kedai. We're going to start at 5:50 a.m. tomorrow morning. We'll start Gemara at 5:50. We're going to do the dedications at 5:48 because Baruch Hashem they are growing a little bit longer. We're going to do dedications 5:48. Shir is going to start promptly at 5:50, and we'll say tomorrow Rabbi Akiva, the story of Rabbi Akiva. We'll say Shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom. Have a great day, everyone.